Bert, 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 Bert! Get him, yeah! Ron Babe was right. Ron Babe was right.
I'm feeling spry. Hey everybody, it's Ron Bain with the Hunting Dog Podcast. Don't skip this intro because there is no podcast. If you skip the intro, you will be skipping the podcast. Yes, this is just an extra, what I call a non-contractual episode celebrating Memorial Day with a story that some people asked me to tell. But first, I will thank my Patreon patrons, Pike Gear, Gunner Kennels, Canine Athlete, Walton, CZ USA, Onyx Maps, Purina Pro Plan, Garmin, and Shooting Sportsman Magazine. I will thank all those. But that's not a normal commercial for me, is it? No, because that usually takes me 16 minutes to get through. Anyway, just a little update. People have been on Zoom rooms with me. A lot of people know what's going on. We have our fourth grandchild. We've been waiting since the 20th of May. It's amazing. They can tell you when a lunar landing or a lunar lander will land on the Mars or Moon or wherever they send them damn things to, and they can pinpoint exactly when they're going to land and send pictures back. You know, that's just all math, right? But when somebody gets a due date, apparently that shit just doesn't fly. It doesn't fly at all. So we've been waiting 10 days, and 10 days later, on the 30th, which is last night, my granddaughter, my fourth grandchild, my first granddaughter, her name is Mara Sue Rock, and she came into the world at 8 pounds, 4 ounces, so congratulations to Kelsey, my daughter, and Adam, my son-in-law. So there we go. She was really glad it wasn't on Memorial Day, too, which, you know, some years it actually could be. But anyway, it wasn't this year. Anyway, what I wanted, I was telling Kyle Huff, you know, the episode I just released about training his dogs for the Invitational and other people's dogs. And in there, I threw in a couple little snippets of a story about one of my German wire hairs named Ziegen. And a few people wrote me an email and said, Ron, I don't think you ever told that whole story, or I think I heard a piece of it. I thought, you know what? That's a Memorial Day story. I don't have any other Memorial Day stories, but on the 28th of May, 2004, well, let me back the story up a little bit. So Ziegen, I named that dog. It was the last one in the litter, and nobody wanted it. It was the gangliest, ugliest German wire hair out of the litter. And I wanted to keep one, but I, wasn't in the business of, picking puppies and not selling puppies. So when the last one was left, I think he was the 9th one. I think we had 9 puppies that year. And there he was, just this long-legged, goofy-looking, hairy-faced pup that, didn't impress me from day one. And apparently it didn't impress anybody else because they would come to the kennel and pick dogs out. And he was like me when they picked the guys for basketball in high school. They keep going, you, and pretty soon there's just me and another short kid left. So Ziegen became my dog because I wanted to keep one. And he progressed very slowly, to say it best. His first NA test, first and only NA test. I'd done a few of them at this point. Was, I believe it was 68 or 67 points and a no prize. He did more things wrong that day in Wisconsin than he did right. A lot of people have asked me where I got the name from, and actually I was taking some German lessons from a church group I was going to back in it. Well, it wasn't a church group, but it was a group of people from a church that this one lady was teaching German to. See, some of the Lutheran churches like to talk German like they're going to talk it all day. Anyway, being as I have a strong German heritage from my father's side, and he never taught me to speak German, I was learning, German. And you got to learn all the verbs, and you got to learn all the genders. And anyway, I was looking through a German translation book for a name that nobody else had. And so the German verb to point or to show, to point at or show, is Ziegen, Z-E-I-G-E-N. And you may say, that doesn't sound right, Ron. Well, let me tell you, in German, I do know this. When the I is before the E is accentuated. And when the E is before the I, it's the opposite. So his name was Ziegen, Dancing Duke Ziegen. But that was his call name. His actual name was Costello. That was my favorite thing to watch back in the day, Abbott and Costello. So if you look up his records, it's Dancing Duke Costello, for those of you who like to fact check. And he was terrible pup, didn't point, didn't track, loved to swim, but he went through that NA test like he didn't want it, just like I went through school. I didn't want to be there. I couldn't wait for school to be out every day, couldn't wait for high school to be over, and I think he had the same thing. But like a lot of dogs, you can't judge a book or early puppy development by the cover. Just can't do it. So coming home with my hat in hand and a wonderful score in the 60s, I had a pigeon coop back in the day, and I wasn't going to give up on him. I didn't have another litter coming or anything like that, and I don't even think I had the money to go look at buying another dog. And so one day I put a couple pigeons out for his dad, who was the notorious Haskell, okay, the black-hearted beast, who had more talent than I did, and way more talent than I did, or way more talent than I had the ability to train. How about we put it that way? So one day I went out and I wing folded a pigeon out behind in my woods back on a pipeline easement that's got grass growing on it. And so this dog's name was Costello all this time. I never had a call name for it early on. And I go to get Haskell. I open the gate, and Costello breaks through, just being he was a bigger knucklehead than his dad was. He just busted through and then foot tracked me. Those dogs that are smart, they follow your foot tracks. That's why a lot of times you plant birds in a field, the dog looks like he's running a milk route, right? And Ziegen did exactly that. It's probably 150 yards back to where I planted this pigeon. And I'm like, oh, great. He's going to backtrack me. He's going to eat the pigeon. Just one more thing I need. One more thing. And I didn't run back there because I figured he's going to be running back with a pigeon in his mouth. There was no point in running. And if you know me, even 25 years ago, I didn't run any faster than I can run now. That's another reason I wasn't picked in basketball or football or baseball or soccer, anything. Anyway, so I casually walked back there. So when you walk back to where I had the dog, it took maybe a minute or so, maybe a minute and a half to walk back there. And I just kind of was looking for him through the woods before I got to this clearing, this pipeline access, really expecting to see him run around chasing a pigeon through the trees or, again, with a pigeon in his mouth. He and his dad were very soft-mouthed, though. I always remember that. Never, whatever condition the bird was when they got it, whether it was planted, shot, wing-tipped, it came back in that same exact condition. For two dogs who like to kill as much as they did when it came to fur, incredibly soft mouths. So anyway, I'm working my way back there, and there was some tall grass, and I couldn't exactly remember, where I knew where I put the bird, and I didn't see the dog, and I'm looking in the sand for footprints, and no footprints. Where in the world did he go? So now I just think he's on a walkabout, which is like making me twice as mad at him. And I start looking for where I put the pigeon, and there he is on point in this grass, just locked up. And if you know how fast a dog can run 120, 30 yards, he had been back there. By the time I got there, he'd been on point for at least 2-3 minutes. And I looked at him, I'm like, you couldn't do that on test day. 2 days later, we're home playing with your father, and you're holding a point on a damn pigeon. Well, anyway, I kind of fell in love with that dog shortly thereafter, and I can honestly say you never know when a light switch is going to go on with the dog. Could have easily been from me putting too many birds down for him, me expecting too much out of him being an asshole. Who knows? We'll never know everything. But what we will know is sometimes when a light comes on, or when a little neuron connects to the brain, to the nose, or whatever it does, That dog, I went in there, and I literally could not make him break point. I mean, like, he held point while I went and reached down, got the pigeon, untied its wings, put it back in my bag. I'm walking away, and he's still pointing where the scent was coming from. And I went up and I tapped him, wiggled him a little bit, finally let him go, and he ran up and smelled the grass and ran around, tail wagging. And I'm like, man, that's got to be a one-off thing. So anyway, that's where he got his name, because the day that he impressed me, I think I had a German lesson, and I asked my teacher. I wasn't that far along in German lessons. I said, "What's the German word for point?" And she said, "You mean like a point on a sword?" I said, "No, like to show something, like I'm pointing at something." And she said, "Zeigen," and it was a German accent. That sounded like a pretty cool name to name a dog. And when you think about it, I named my dog Point. Could you imagine if I ever ran into some German judges or German immigrants that we ended up hunting with who spoke the language, and they said, "Wo ist die Hundesname?" That is, what is the dog's name? "Wo ist die Hundesname?" And I would say, "Point." Come on. That's a terrible name. I named my dog Point. Well, it was his nickname anyway. Well, Costello never failed to amaze me or amuse me in all the years I owned him. And I owned him in fact, long story is I probably should have put him down 6-8 months sooner than I did. He was about 14 or 15. I can't remember that day. I can't remember without looking up his, vet records. But where this story is bringing back around to is not the fact that he failed his NA test and then passed his first utility test, and then his next utility test he decided to get a prize 1 on, which totally amazed me. I was living down in Virginia. A lot of you hear about that all the time. Beer Mountain. I spent total of about 12 years down there. And before I owned my home down there, I had earned that in 2003, I earned that prize 1 with Zeigen. So I said, Al Harmeyer, my buddy Al from Crystal Creek Kennels, he was working with me part-time. When he could get away from the kennel, he'd come down to Virginia. That guy could work me into the ground, and he's 10 years older than me. He might be even older than that. But he loved to work. He loved construction. He loved the whole thing. And of course, being a dog trainer, and he had a dog named Rock, and we always traveled with our dogs. And Rock had got his prize 1 in 2003. So now I had a built-in helper, trainer, mentor that was, not only a dog trainer, but he'd been to the Invitational, so he knew how it ran. And, I have to digress here for a minute. In that episode with Kyle Huff, which is where this all started from me telling a piece of this story, Kyle mentions a mentor from New Jersey. And that mentor called me up and said, "How come? Did you edit my name out of that podcast?" I said, "No, I didn't edit the name." He said, "Well, why didn't he say my name?" I guess, he was looking for a little kudos. And, rightly so. I mean, Kyle praised him up and down one side or the other. Kyle praised him more than I would praise the man. So, Tim Clark, here's your mentor acknowledgement from the episode with Kyle Huff. Tim Clark was the judge that helped Kyle with his first Invitational. So I hope that straightens everything out there, Tim, okay? And only Tim would call me up and say, "Hey, Ron, what, did you edit my name out?" I love you, Tim. I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Anyway, so Al was my mentor, judge, and trainer, and we worked all, well, of course, and we worked all spring on his dog and my dog. And we had just the ideal, the few years I had been working, I haven't owned my house yet there in Beer Mountain yet in Virginia. So we had stayed at a really nice, an old motel that had a kitchenette. I had brought a camper down, and I actually had my camper at Natural Chimneys State Park. So we had a lot of, we had a lot of I had about 2 years there in the Valley, before we were training for this test. Well, I was very fortunate. There was actually a game bird breeder right in our backyard, like literally right in our backyard outside of the plant. And he raised chukars and quail and pheasant. He raised ducks. I mean, it was just meant to be. I mean, if I was stuck in Virginia, I would have had to run up to the Potomac chapter. Sorry about that, guys. And that was about a 2-hour run, once a week. I couldn't have done it. But with this game bird breeder that I had made friends with and bought birds from, and Al being there with me, I had a built-in training partner. We had a supply of birds. I would literally call the breeder up, the game bird breeder, and his name is slipping my memory at the moment. But anyway, we would make an order, like how many birds we wanted that night. We had a place with water. We had another place that a Labrador trainer gave us to hunt with, gave us to train on. It was right along I-81, all fenced in off the highway. Beautiful place. So depending on what we thought we were going to work on that night, I would call in the order, being that I was the boss and Al was always taking care of the crew. I would leave early. I'd go get the crates, come back, grab Al, and we'd go off and train. And like everybody training for the Invitational, it seemed like it was 5-6 nights a week, and a lot of times it was. So we've been going at it and getting these dogs conditioned. I never took training, and still don't. I never took training a dog as serious as I did that year getting Zygon ready for the Invitational. I am sure Al could not say the same thing because he had done it before. But to me, it was like, okay, we got to start roading this dog. We got to have him. Well, he didn't drag log chains, but I did everything I could. Lots of swimming, lots of running, and it felt I would never do it again. I always say I would never do it again, but it was a taxing summer, spring and summer, but it was worth going. It was worth trying to do that with the dog, But where this is all coming around to is Memorial Day, okay? So Memorial Day, 2004. It is May I got a few show notes here. I actually called this place up this morning, got my report back. On May 28th, I was going to go home for Memorial Day. That was my intention. And I believe May 28th was a Thursday or Friday that week. And so we're staying at the Days Inn in Verona, Virginia, which is just south of the job site. And this was probably back in the day, I'm guessing it was an old Holiday Inn conference center. Had a big inside courtyard with a pool, had all kinds of meeting rooms, and it had tons and tons of acreage. And, nowadays there'd be 5 motels in this area. But at that point, I think it was a Holiday Inn, but when we stayed there, it was a Days Inn. And there was just this big back area where I could go, after getting the dogs worked out, I could go back, Al could go back. He only had the one dog, and I had 2. I had Frankie with me at the time, too, a German wire hair pointer. That was actually sired by his dad. Yeah, by Zygon. And Zygon was 4, what did it say on the report? 4-year, 6-month-old male, intact, 74.8 pounds. So, as my mother would say, to make a long story longer, I would then go in the back. Zygon would be all rested up in a kennel. I would feed him his food, give him some water, let him go. Same thing with Frankie. Frankie was just in like preliminary training, like puppy training. And those 2 were best friends back in the day. And like Frankie and him, Frankie would never leave Zygon. Probably a big mistake, because I let them run together all the time. And I was in the back of this conference center. I did not know that there was a back entrance to this conference center. Okay, so, people say, never take your dog off a leash. Never. Oh, well, I've been guilty of it, and it's bit me in the butt several times. But this Memorial Day weekend, it bit me in the butt harder than I've ever been bitten in the butt. I'm calling the dogs. It's getting toward dark, and I'm calling the dogs. I'm like, man, they were just over this little rise on an unimproved old road that that had weeds growing through the asphalt. So that's why I always felt it was a pretty safe area. And I'm calling the dogs, and I can hear the tags kind of coming up the hill that I can't see. So I know they're coming. And then all of a sudden, I'll never forget, it was a full-size Ford van coming out of nowhere, coming from the south. And I'm like, where? I've never seen a vehicle. So there must have been a delivery entrance that was used occasionally. And this time of night, I had never seen a vehicle out there. I mean, it was like a desert out there. And I'm calling the dogs, and I'm seeing the headlights of this van coming. Headlights were on, but it wasn't quite dark out. And I'm like, oh, please, don't listen to me for once. And this van was coming. This van's getting closer and closer to me. This dog, and sure as shit, right as this van is coming right even with me on this road, and he can see me, but there was no reason for him to hit the brakes. Here comes Frankie, one big leap across this road, and here comes Zygon right behind Frankie. Wham! Just wham! Right, I mean, I could fling a quarter to how far away it was when it happened to me. I heard the thud. I heard the ribs break. And the guy, I don't think the guy thought he hit anything, to be honest with you. If he did, maybe he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing back there. Whatever the reason was, I was not mad at the man in the van. I was not mad at the driver of the van. I was mad at myself. My favorite dog, my only dog I utility prize won with, the dog I've been training for months, is laying there on the ground, urinating all over himself, bleeding out of his nose. And as far as I know, this dog is, minutes from being dead. And I was standing there just in shock, truly in shock. And Frankie's running around like a young dog will do. He doesn't know his dad got hit by a van, has no idea what's going on. I'm looking at Zygon, and I'm like, I got to see if I got a gun. Well, I did not. I think in Al's truck we had all the guns. Had I had a gun with me at that moment, I would have put him out of his misery. From what I visually saw and now am now seeing on the pavement, that this is not something you can come back from. And it was like slow motion for a while. I kept looking at him, and then I had to grab Frankie, and I had to get Frankie put in the kennel. And I kept looking at him, and I kept walking over there, and just these little squirts of, pee coming out of him, and this little trickle, not a major trickle, but a slow trickle of blood coming out of his nose. And he was laying there he was breathing, but he wasn't going anywhere. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should pick him up. I didn't know if another car was going to come by. You just don't know what to do. And in fact, it's a little blurry. I believe we were using Nextel. Yeah, we were using Nextel phones back in those days, and they had that little chirp, little button, little side button you do. And I tried getting a hold of Donnie, who was also staying in a room with us. So we had several rooms at that motel, and I get Donnie to answer. And I told Donnie where I was. I said, Donnie, I need help. Can you come back here? Told him where I was in the behind. I said, you'll see my truck out there. I started the engine, turned the lights on so everybody could see me. Zygon's still laying in this road. Again, this is a road that had weeds growing through it. I had no reason to believe anybody would ever be on this road. And Donnie come out there, and he looked at it, and he says, well, what do you want to do? I said, Donnie, I don't know. I think he's still breathing. I said, do you have a 22 with you, or do you have a gun? He goes, no. Well, Al must have went somewhere. I think Al went somewhere to go eat with some of the other guys. So I literally had to get a phone book, okay, because Nextels didn't have a smartphone back in the day, obviously. We get him loaded into the back seat of my Ford pickup truck. I kind of figured he was dead, but at least now I thought, well, I have to bring him to a vet to have him euthanized, right? That's the only thing you can do. I'm not going to not going to do anything besides that. But it was so incredibly surreal and definitely there's no way you could picture a dog could survive this thing. And as I told you before I started the story, Zygon lived to be about 15 years old. But there was an all-night vet clinic in Verona, and they were only open until 6 a.m., which was fine. I got there. There was nobody there. Told them what happened. They came out. We carried the dog in. The dog was in complete shock. His gums were ashen white. I said, I'd like you to put my dog down. I'm sure he's going to be dead here in a minute anyway. And the vet checked his vitals. He said, do you want me to try to do anything? I said, well, do you really think something could be done? I mean, I just saw him get whapped right in front of my face by a 6,000-pound vehicle. And he said, well, you'd be surprised, but he says, I don't want to tell you what to do. And this is now, I don't know, 10:30 at night probably, at this little clinic. And he says, well, I'll tell you what. He said, let me start him on some IVs. We'll take some x-rays. Just come back here in the morning before 6 o'clock. That's when we close. You'll have to get him out of here. And I don't know that I slept that night, or I don't know that I drank that night. That night is actually a blur, total blur. Couldn't quit blaming myself. Couldn't quit blaming everything. But, this could happen anywhere, anytime. But it doesn't happen if they're on a leash. Again, I felt this place is safe. I almost felt like Al and I could have used it for a training grounds. That's how desolate and big this unimproved area was behind this motel. So anyway, didn't sleep much. Got out, got dressed in the morning, went to that clinic probably about 5:30. I got there about 5:30 in the morning. Saw the doc that was on duty the night before, and first thing I said was, "Is he gone?" And he said, "No, he's still breathing." And I was kind of like, "Well, how could that be?" Again, how could that be? He said, "Well, look," he says, "there's nothing I can do for you. We close this clinic at 6 a.m. I don't have a replacement. We don't have overnight care for a dog. But there is, when things like this happen, there's a clinic just down the road that you could go to, and then they could make an assessment and possibly recommend him." There's a place in, I say Richmond, Virginia. It's Mannequin, Virginia. It's called Veterinary Referral Critical Care. And so I went over to that vet, and they looked at him. He was laying in the back of the truck. His head was facing the passenger door, still breathing, no IV or anything on him because they didn't go to that many means at this little all-night place. And the vet came out and looked at him, took a stethoscope and listened to his heart. His heart was okay. She said, well, it was a lady vet. I don't remember her name. She's very nice. She said, if you want, in a case like this, I can call VRCC. It's over by Richmond, and they are a critical care, a true critical care facility that a vet recommends that they bring to. In other words, if they can't handle something, they call VRCC. And so Zygon that morning became VRCC client number 23036. And I'll read you a little bit from this report. I actually got them to fax. That's so old. That's when we were faxing back when this happened. I got them to email this report to me because I couldn't find it in any of my papers. Zygon was presented to Shenandoah Valley Regional Emergency. That's the one in Verona. 8 to 9 p.m. Mr. Boehm is a private contractor from Michigan installing conveyor in the Shenandoah Valley. His temporary living in Harrisonburg at least till the end of June. The referring veterinarian is not his regular veterinarian and examined Zygon for the first time prior to sending him to VRCC. Radiographs obtained by the emergency service in Verona demonstrated pleural effusion, mild myocardia, pulmonary contusions, multiple rib fractures on the left side, Abdominal radiographs demonstrated general loss of contrast and a food-filled stomach, which is exactly. I was hoping that him and Frankie would go out there and make their poop and come back. Received intravenous fluids that night and 2 milligrams of, I don't know how to say all these words, Buprenex. Physical examination at the time when presented to VRCC demonstrated severely sedated patient, pale mucous membranes, normal CRT, mild hypothermia, normal heart rate, increased respiration, mild dyspnea, dull lung sounds on the left side of the chest, normal heart sounds. The dog had heart, let me tell you. It just didn't break his heart. It broke my heart. Several superficial abrasions on the left side of the thorax, shoulder, abdomen, numerous gravel burns on the left front and rear leg, and moderately distended abdomen with palatable fluid wave. I don't know what that means. Probably like bloat, like his stomach was bloated. Sluggish motor function. Cranial nerves were normal. Tympanimus appear intact, although view is somewhat obstructed by the copious amounts of brown ceremonious debris. I guess that's poop, I'm guessing. Was unable to palpate any long bone fractures. Face and mandible may still be a question. Yeah. So I literally drove about 2 hours with him in the back seat and, expecting the next morning to be just picking up the dog for, disposal. Here this dog is alive, and this is kind of a critical part of the story. And I'm not saying to go to extreme measures to save a dog that got hit by a car. It's just what happened to me and Zygon. But what I saw and what you read in that was report is he was basically lethargic. He was laying there. He was pale. He was cold. And when we put him in the van, like I said, his head was facing the passenger door, the back seat. He was all stretched out. I remembered clearly because the vet opened the passenger door and leaned over his head, looked at the blood on the face, looked at the dried blood, looked at the contusions, which they didn't do any treatment of that night because they were just seeing if he was going to survive. Checked his heart rate, said they'll make the referral call. They gave me the address, 2-hour drive out to VRCC. When I got to VRCC, it was like some television show about pulling up to a hospital. This was a dig-doggedy real animal hospital, emergency animal hospital. I pulled up, and they were waiting with a gurney and about 3 staff members right out on the circular pull-up in front doors of the hospital. And they slid him out. But before they slid him out, I met them and I said, they want to pull him out. I'm assuming they want to pull him out face first. I said, open the passenger door. I had not looked in the back seat, nor could I really look really good at it, and I wasn't thinking about it. So in the time it took me to drive there, that dog somehow stood up, pulled himself up, twisted around, did something. He's now facing the driver's side door in the back, which to me, it was like this glimmer of hope. Like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. The dog moved. I haven't seen him move since he couldn't move. And so anyway, they bring the gurney around to the other side, and they get him out on the gurney, take him in, get all my information. And, of course, I'm just waiting around. And Doc comes out and tells me, the procedure, what they're going to do. And it was I don't know how to explain it. Not only that everybody was gone for Memorial Day weekend, and I wasn't sad about that. I mean, but literally I had to call my wife home and say, I'm not coming home for Memorial Day. Why? Well, Zygon just got hit by a truck, and I'm at the hospital, and I'm not driving today, and I got to see what happens. And she, of course, understood. And I highlighted a couple more of these little. This hospital, I could never thank a hospital more. They were so professional, and the reports they gave you and the communications they gave you. But I'll jump forward to June 1st. I'll back it up. Abdominal ultrasound was repeated on June 1st, revealed a small amount of fluid in the abdominal cavity, greater than 90% resolution. The area of previously noted retroperitoneal hematoma was much smaller. I think that means his internal bleeding was smaller. Hypercoic and somewhat organized in structure. The splenic hematoma was barely perceivable. The liver hematoma was still present, but like the area in a retroperitoneal space, man, this is tough. Even if I'd have practiced this, guys and girls, I wouldn't have got this right, was smaller and somewhat organized. So what that meant was the internal bleeding was going down. It turned out he had internal bleeding in all of his organs. He had just blood inside of his insides. The cortex of the right kidney appeared unchanged, somewhat irregular. The chest radiographs demonstrated normal cardiac silhouette, multiple displaced and single rib site fractures, all on the left side. Resolution of the previously noted pleural effusion was 20% improved on the left side, left-sided pulmonary contusions. Pelvic and spinal radiographs were normal. So the upside was he did not break his back, and he did not break his pelvis, which breaking a pelvis is just like on a person. You can come back with it, but you ain't going to run the Olympics. Anyway, then it goes on. Zygon vomited several times on June 7th. Now, that was from June 1st. Due to our increasing Zygons and nutritional allotments. He responded well to a drug to keep it down. I'm gonna quit butchering up all these words. It was all the things they did, all the things they gave him over the next 24 hours. Chest radiographs were repeated on June 8th, demonstrated marked improvement in the pulmonary contusions, blah, 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 a bunch of stuff for heartworm. Why they did that, I don't know. We really need to keep Zygon quiet and comfortable. Exercise should be restricted for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Short leash walks for elimination purposes only. Zygon is finally going home. We wish him and his dad all the best. Please feel free if there are any questions or concerns. Respectfully, Ed Fallon, DVM MS, Small Animal Internal Medicine. That was 10, 11 days total that he was there at that hospital. And, I wanted to come back. I now wanted to go to that invitational, but I thought there's no way I can go to that invitational. I mean, this is now June 10th. I'm sitting at home with this dog in my trailer, and I got to be in Mexico, Missouri in 2 months. And 4 to 6 weeks, I'm supposed to have him on a leash walk only. And I promised Al I was going to go no matter what. We're going to be there. I was going to support him. I also promised Al that I would run Zygon if he was physically able to run, even if I couldn't train him another day of obedience between now and when the invitational was. And but I got to back up to a story. I really did not believe that he was going to survive, and they gave me no indication of that in the first couple days. It was, I butchered up the words in the report, but when I would talk to the vet, when I'd go I went and visited him every day. First 2 days, he was in a big walk-in cell, sedated, with the IV bottle and the catheter sewn. The catheter was sutured into him. He wasn't doing anything. He was just laying there. So the first 2 visits I made, there he was in critical care with no acknowledgement of me, no acknowledgement of anything. And I was starting to wonder and worry financially that, is there really a chance for this dog? And when I would talk to the vet, he said, Ron, I have seen dogs come back from injuries like your dog has. I cannot guarantee it, but I can tell you we're not spinning our wheels here. I have seen this. It has worked. Everything that is wrong with him can technically heal, but he said, I can't guarantee anything. So, by my second visit, I felt better, but I felt like I was visiting an older person in the hospital that you knew was going to pass away. It was like, yeah, you feel like, got to visit him out of guilt. I can't leave him. But he didn't even know I was there. Well, fast forward a couple days. I couldn't get out there for, I forget if it was a Saturday or a Sunday. Skipped the day. And I called them up. I called up the clinic, tell them I was going to come out because they did appreciate having notice. They'd have somebody ready. And I said, I want to come out and talk to the doctor and see how Zygon's doing. I think this was on day 3 maybe, or 4. Yeah, it's all fuzzy in my head. But this trip to the vet was not fuzzy. So I get there, and this young vet tech comes up to me, and she said, "Are you Zygon's dad?" And I always think, yeah, I guess not technically. His dad is a black-hearted son of a bitch that lives back in Michigan right now. But anyway, are you Zygon's dad? I said, yes. She goes, well, you're here to see him? He says, I'll go get him. I said, well, how do we do that? I said, don't I go in the back room? She goes, no, I'll go get him. And I'm like, wow. And I remember this was like I would call it a children's waiting area because, when this happens to dogs and cats or dogs are there for treatments, they bring their kids, and there was all kinds of toys and kids' books and Brio tables and shit there. So I'm just sitting in this chair, and out she comes through this electronic door, and there's Zygon walking, and there's a catheter still hooked up to him. Oh, no, yeah, I think the catheter was still hooked up to him, an IV bag, and an IV on a roller. And he was just walking real slow along that IV bag roller. And I looked at him, and I started crying. And I mean, seeing him on all 4 feet coming toward me with just no tail wagging, but coming toward me, walking next to that vet tech, I just lost it because I never thought. I honestly, deep down, I thought, well, they're just going to let me know in 3 or 4 more days when, these organs fail that, that's it. They did everything they could. Thank you very much. When I saw him walking out, man, I'm losing it right now thinking about it. And anyway, she saw how elated I was and emotional I was, and she's kind of holding me on the back. And I said, does this mean he's going to live? And she says, it's certainly a good sign in our eyes. She kind of told me that they went back there, and it was in the morning, and there he was standing. They hadn't seen him stand for 2 days or 3 days either. And he was just standing there looking at him. And I think they told me that actually that's maybe the 3rd day. That's when they might have took the catheter out because I might have been there on the 4th day. Anyway, that's not important to the story. This is my mother's habit of me just blabbing on when I talk. So I'm very emotional. The vet tech is kind of patting me on the back, and I'm petting Zygon. And I keep looking for that tail wag, like, come on, buddy, let me know. Let me know it's me, because I didn't know if it was just the drugs or if he was coming out to, all these different things go through your head. But to see that dog on his own volition walking is limited and as painful as it looked. Well, you can imagine all those cracked ribs on his side. Anybody who's cracked a rib, and I have, knows that movement is not easy, and they are not bipedal. So I looked at him, and I was just petting him, and I just was kind of sitting there crying. And there was these kids' toys there. Now, what I got to go back to is Zygon was I've never had a wire hair. I've never had a dog, and never seen a dog that had more retrieve. I'm saying there's equal ones for sure. This dog's one thing he was a constant was his retrieving. From when he was a puppy to now when he was 4 months old. I saw it so often in him, and I took him through the trained retrieve on the table. He went through it like a breeze. He went through it like he'd been in the end zone. And this is, like I said, this is when I was training him, getting ready for his utility test, his first one, I think, at 2.5 years old, and then the one he passed at 3.5. I said, this dog is so good at retrieving and understands so well, because it wasn't from me training. I mean, I did everything right, but it was the dog, too. So he had a habit of coming up and stealing my beer can. If I set it somewhere, he'd have it, and the beer would be going blub, 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 out the side of the beer can. And I said, give me that beer can back. And I drink it and then, throw it in the grass, see if he'd go pick it up. And he was, again, such a soft-mouthed dog. Even an empty beer can, he would only mildly crimp a little bit or crumple a little bit. And that's, if he went and picked one up. And I said, I wonder if I can get him to be one of those dogs that can go get me a beer. And so I started out with a cooler. The lid was broken, like so many cheap coolers back in the day. So I left the lid off the cooler, and I put 2 full cans of beer in there, 3 or 4. I can't remember how many I put in there. But when I started out, I put full cans of beer around the cooler on the floor. And then later on, with the top on, I put the can of beer on the top of the cooler. And I could literally, from anywhere, and I just changed his fetch command to beer. It was very simple. He knew what we were doing. He'd watch me set it up. I would tap him on the head and say, beer. It was just like I said, fetch. Doesn't mean you can change that on a dog in a heartbeat. And he would go and get these beers. Never popped a beer with his teeth in his life. I don't know how that was possible, but he never did it. And when I saw his ability to do this, I took away the beer cans from around the cooler, and then I left the lid off the cooler, and then I put the beer cans in the cooler. Again, these are full beer. And I would go and say, fetch. He'd run over that cooler. He'd run around. He'd look inside the cooler. His head would go in. He'd grab one. Sometimes he'd put it down and re-grip it. Sometimes he would come back to you like a big giant cigar in his mouth. Being an 80-pound dog, he could fit a beer can in there either way. And I started thinking, this is going to be fun. I didn't even have a smartphone back then, of course. I think somebody got it on video one day with a camera. And I don't know who that person is. But I used an Igloo cooler that used to be what they call a swivel top. It had a thumb button on the lever on the top handle. And if you depress that little round button, the lid could go over the front side or over the back side, like a 300 or 180 degree lid swing. Very popular cooler back then, midday. So I started training him to get out of a smaller cooler like that. Left that lid open all the time. And again, this dog was a retrieving maniac. I mean, he would just be standing there with something in his mouth. And I know you've all seen dogs, some version of this, but trust me, I've been fortunate to have a whole lot of natural retrievers in my life that I just cleaned up the retrieving maybe with hold and carry. This dog, there was something wrong with this dog when it came to retrieving. So eventually, I disabled that little round thumb button on the cooler. So now the cooler lid would appear closed right up there at the top at 12 o'clock. But Zygon knew there was beer in there, and he would paw at it. If he paw at it, it would pull the lid toward him, and he would get his reward of the beer can. And sometimes he would smell it and nose it, and he'd slap it with his nose, and the lid would flip over the other way. And I started having fun with this all day. I was doing this more times than I was doing anything. I was like, hey, watch this, watch this, watch this. Zygon, beer. He'd run across the yard, open a cooler. People were just making offers to buy them, right? And I always said, boy, if I could ever have a trick dog like that, I'd take him and show people. So I started going to like Pheasants Forever banquets, Rough Grouse banquets. I was a member of all those things back in the 80s and 90s, and went to them pretty regularly, I should say. And so I would take him, and I would give a little talk about NAVHDA. That's what people had always asked me to come up and do a little, 5-minute spiel to why they should be involved with NAVHDA. And I would tell them that, one of the beauties is, there's benefits. It's not all just about hunting. And we would have this cooler, my jury-rigged cooler. It would have a counterweight in the bottom. It would have a flat flagstone brick so it wouldn't tip over. And there'd be 2 cans of beer in it. It would always be a Bud Light and a Miller Lite. And we'd have that cooler where most everybody in the place could see it, maybe up on a stage or, over by an entrance. And I'd say, somebody get my dog for me. And I'd have a friend ready. I said, Zygon, how you doing? I'd pet him. I'd say, Zygon, beer. He'd run around through that place. He'd run around through the tables. People were looking at him. People were laughing. He would find that cooler. He would open that cooler. He'd bring me a beer back, trotting through the tables, up back to where I was, usually by a podium. He'd sit there, and he'd hold that can of beer, and I'd look at it. No matter which one he brought me, I always told him it was the wrong beer. Now, you got to remember the banquet. By the time they've overserved everybody and everybody's eaten, this is before we do the long, boring raffle drawings, right? Everybody's pretty – the reason they prime you up with alcohol is so you bid on more things and come home with more things that you don't need. Well, so I have a very captive audience of, I'll say, half inebriated people. And so they're watching it, and he brings me the Bud Light. And I said, Saigen, I don't drink Bud Light. Get me a real beer. And he would go back. And he'd go back to that cooler. Of course, there'd only be one other beer in there. And what would it be? Be the other brand in this case. It would be the Miller Lite. He'd bring it to me. I'd open it. I'd start drinking it, and the house would come down. The roof would come down. So I had to back that story up because of what happened when I got to see him at the clinic that day. So the vet tech is standing there, and I'm petting him, and I kind of calmed down. I quit crying, so to speak, and she was just telling me some not statistics. She was telling me some analysis of what they've been doing, and I think, in fact, I do now kind of remember the story better. The more I haven't told the story like this. It takes forever to tell. That's why the podcast was perfect for it. I think that was on day 3, or that had to be day 4. So that when they saw him standing up, they knew they could take him outside with a short walk, and he went out and relieved himself. And she told me, she goes, it's really great. We were able to take him outside. We had to take the sutures out of his catheter, and he's able to relieve himself now. And I asked him if he was eating, and they said, no, they're just giving him some food through the IV, and I don't think they didn't want anything in his stomach contents. And for you people who might think that's not good, dogs can go a really long time without food in their stomach. And I mean a really long time. I wouldn't want to. Of course, look at me now. I think I go 3 hours without putting food in my stomach. But anyway, they weren't giving him any food yet, but he was processing the fluids, and his kidney, even though he had, blood, and he had, contusions on everything, and what they call pulmonary contusions, he was starting to function. And so I'm petting him, and she was asking about him, and, she said, well, I should get him back. I should get him back into his kennel back there. And I said, well, hang on a minute. And I looked at him, and I wanted to see that tail wag. I wanted to see that tail wag, and I hadn't seen it yet. Just hadn't seen it. And, we put all kinds of human emotions and all kinds of human, what they call it, anthropomorphizing our dogs. And I'm as guilty as the next person of it, okay? I said, let me try something. And she says, well, what are you going to do? I said, and I certainly couldn't tell her the whole story I just told you guys. I said, I got to see if he's going to make it. And there was a bunch of children's toys there, and there was like some kind of a stuffed animal, like a little bear or a duck or something like that. It was in a little toy box. And I went and grabbed it, and I held it up to him, and I said, Saigen, fetch? And I didn't say it like a command, I said it with a question mark. I said, Saigen, fetch? And he looked up at me, and I know he was drugged up. He opened his mouth and took that toy out of my hand and held it there. And that girl, she started crying. And I said, he's going to make it. And I saw his tail while he was holding that in his mouth. Just a little flick, 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 flick. And I said, he's going to make it. He's going to make it. And she said, I've never seen anything like that in my life, ever. She goes, that's impossible. And I said, you just don't know. You just don't know what's possible sometimes. And that was my medical degree. I had to see if this dog remembered that. I just didn't know if it was even my dog anymore. And again, well-trained, he would never spit that out until I grab it and give him the release command out. And he opened his mouth, and she says, well, I better get him back. And I said, yeah. And I said, I'll see you tomorrow, buddy. And I visited him the next day, and the next day again, like I read in the report, I think, what did he say, June 7th or 9th or something, whenever I said, Zygon was going home with his dad. And so now I've got this dog that can eat a little bit. He can pee himself. He's got to stay on a leash. I'm living in a motel. Well, my guys are in a motel. I'm back in my camper now. And I got the Invitational coming up. And I'm not saying I broke the rules, but I kept talking to this vet. This vet, Ed, was just fantastic. I had literally had his cell phone number. He said, call me anytime. And I told him, I said, he looks like he's doing really good. I said, can I let him go off leash for a little bit? And he said, no, don't do that. He said, the only thing I would let you do is if you have a bicycle, you could pedal really slow, but you could pick up his pace a little bit. Just a real slight trot, just something faster than a walk. And I borrowed a bicycle, and borrowed from a friend of mine. I said, I need a bicycle. I got to start doing some roading with this dog. And of course, he's like, yo, you're nuts. And I made the mistake of roading with Zygon. With the first night I roaded him, we're going very slow, and we're on a path. And he had never been, rode tied to a bicycle off a Jaeger lead. And I managed to run over his front left paw, which almost sent him back to the vet. The way he yanked, the way he yiped, and the way he was limping on that paw, I'm like, oh, frick, come on. I get a dog that almost died. He shouldn't be alive. And now I'm going to break his paw. But apparently I didn't break his paw. I just pinched it pretty good. But he came back. So that Memorial Day weekend was one that I think about it every Memorial Day weekend. He came back in that August. He ran in the Invitational. And in my eyes, he passed. In the judge's eyes, correctly judged. No, he did not pass. He did not get his VC. But Zygon will always be a VC in my. He was just he had the most heart, and maybe that's what it was. He had, and for coming from his dad, his sire, who had a zero cooperation level and all the talent in the world. In the beginning, Zygon had none of the talent and all the cooperation in the world. And just became, he became a clown. He became a regular at picnics and events, and everybody knew him. And he had heart. And I before the invitation, I told the vet, that I ran over his paw. And I said, but, he was trotting pretty good. He says, well, you can increase that maybe every 3 days, pedal just a little faster, but keep it no galloping whatsoever. So I lost about, did I keep it to 6 weeks like the vet told me to? No, but I took it real serious and slow. And as soon as I saw him functioning, took him back in for a checkup. They couldn't find any reason that he couldn't start, doing some field work. And I would bet it probably was a full 6 weeks. So you're talking from, June, the second week of June, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I had about a month, basically, to get ready to go to the Invitational. And didn't get to work him on birds all that time. Couldn't run him off leash on anything. Could swim him. The swimming was good for him, and the vet told me that. So we were able to work on the blind retrieve. Could work on a shackled duck. Of course, that's always hard to imitate, but we did our best. And so yeah, that's my Memorial Day story of Zygon, and I will never forget him. And I don't think I'll ever forget any of my dogs. There's been some that have been with me short periods of time, some that have been with me all the way till they went, and he was one of them. But I'll wrap it up with saying he also he told me something that day in the vet's office when I asked him to fetch. And he literally looked at me and he opened his mouth and he grabbed it. I didn't put it in his mouth. He grabbed it as he was taught to do and as he was so good at. The day my vet, Dr. Zamaron, came over to my kennel to put Zygon down, the day I realized that his capacity for movement was just not fair to keep him around. And I always wondered if I kept the dog alive too long. Everybody, and I think we're all, if you've had enough dogs, you're going to be guilty of it at least once in your life. So my reference to how his tail wasn't wagging until I gave him that little kid's toy to fetch. I had already had a spot picked out in the woods behind my house where he was going to be buried and where he was going to be euthanized. And the day before that, I had shot a grouse over at Cedar Creek, one of my favorite little grouse spots here in Muskegon County. And it was sitting in a refrigerator. And Dr. Z got here with his bag, and we shot the shit a little bit. And I didn't need to put Zygon on a leash. But I told the vet, I said, tail's not wagging. He says, people put too much into a tail. And I said, and I told him, I think I had told him before about, the story at the hospital in Virginia. And I knew I waited too long because I said, hold on, Doc. I went and I got this grouse and I stuck it. I don't know if I put a bird bag on or I carried a bird bag with this dead grouse. And we went out to where I've buried many of my pets. And we said our goodbyes. But before we said our goodbyes, I thought, and I got this from another judge mentor of mine named John Crozier. He had to have a dog put down far too early. And I hope I'm not butchering this story if he's listening. But he brought, if I'm not mistaken, and if not, it's a good way to remember the story. He brought a live chucker to when he had to have his dog put down. And he put the bird in a situation, I don't know if it was on a launch or a bird bag or what it was, or a foot release trap. But his vet was accommodating. And he let him point a bird when they give him that first shot to relax him, that just puts him to sleep, that just makes him completely fall asleep before they euthanize him. And I said, wouldn't that be great if Zygon could have a grouse in his mouth when he gets that first shot? And I'll never forget, I took it out and I said, he could smell it. Certainly his nose never quit working. His eyes were cloudy. His hearing was probably mostly gone. And I put that grouse out in front of him, expecting him to grab it. And he turned his head. And then I put the bird on the other side where he turned his head to. I said, Zygon, fetch. And he turned his head all the way back the other way. And I put that grouse back in I think I was wearing a vest that day. I can't remember. And I looked at Dr. Zamaron and I said, you're right, the tail doesn't always tell you everything. But when he refused to take that grouse in his mouth, I think he told me that he was done. And sorry about that. That's tough. You know how it is. You don't think about it all year and you put a little thought into it. But I think that was Zygon's way of telling me you waited too long. And whether it's a takeaway from that or just a thought to leave you with, I don't think there's a wrong decision. We're human. We're flawed. We are flawed, but I don't think our dogs are. Yeah, it's a tough one. I have to keep hitting the pause button. Like I said, I know we're flawed as humans, but sometimes I don't think our dogs are. And I was going to leave you with that quote by George Bird Evans, but that one just makes me cry. But I'll leave you with this. This is for the Hunting Dog Podcast. This is the Memorial Day celebration for everybody out there who has had those dogs that left a that burned a memory in their soul and left a mark on not just you, but people you met. I am not going to go, I'm not going to wrap this up without being ultimately fair to all those who didn't like my dog. I don't really care. I loved my dog. He had his flaws. In his later years, he didn't tolerate another male dog in my keeping. He'd be okay hunting with other ones. I had to literally rehome 2 of my younger dogs. One of his prodigy that was with him on the day he got hit, named Frankie. And later on, a dog I got from my friend John Crozier. I had to rehome that dog, Tonzer, because when those dogs got old enough to challenge their dad or what would be their superior, he was not perfect, okay? But on Memorial Day, I think of him every Memorial Day. I look at a couple pictures of him. I remember all the fun we had with him. I remember the fun the kids had with him. I remember the fun I had with him at banquets. And just so there. Happy Memorial Day. This is nothing against veterans. This is just a Memorial Day for our dogs, for people who listen to the Hunting Dog Podcast and have that dog or will have one day that leaves you with those memories. I love you guys. I love you girls. And I love you dogs more.